Kieran. In a land of rolling hills and nestling valleys, of deciduous wood and sheltered pasture, the sun gave its steady reddening warmth to the early yellowing leaves of the woods. Small groups of cottages tucked themselves amongst trees and beside streams. They were as wood amongst wood or stone amongst stone until spring arrived, when a profusion of flowers would pour from window sills to flood through gardens and cascade along the networks of narrow lanes. The lanes cut through centuries of earth. Their banks were high and topped with dense hedges and with the arching limbs of ancient trees that irregularly framed the clear sky above. The traveller had come from the coast where, from the peaks of the bleached cliff, he had listened to the endless crashing of waves below, and with the sun and breezes upon him, he had slept and he had dreamed. He stood with a girl and with an old shepherd on a hill. The shepherd pointed to the distance where a beam of light pierced thick imprisoning cloud. Lightning flashed, but no rain fell. Rising into the sky on swan-white wings, the traveller surged towards the light. He looked on a river fresh from its source. Upstream, green leaves and fields bordered reflections from the silvery water. At a wide bend in a pool beneath a fall, two women, one old and one young, floated weightless, spread beneath the sky. Nearby, 12 swans, beside freshest river reeds, swam the water's glinting surface. The traveller, broad-winged, followed the river down. The sun above bathed a broad dale and a town where the river settled after its gentle rush from the hills. Further down, the ground fell away and other streams joined. In the distance, a web of golden snakes writhed the open ground, searching, seeking release from the containing land. Awakening, the traveller felt the wind gusting north, over the shallow land. A raven appeared. It circled on the wind, calling to him, rising and falling on the gusts. The traveller stood to stretch limbs and take one last look at the sea. Leolfer, with long ruffled outer coat, stood nearby, watching the black bird. The traveller mounted his horse. He thought of his dream, of the golden snakes, the winding river and the green valley, of the swans and of the two women, one young and one old. Northwest, after the raven, they passed through high rolling hills and protected valleys. At a large town they crossed a great river and then turned northeast to enter an undulating land of field and forest. The raven kept on until, after many days, they arrived in a flat, lowland country of waterways meandering to the horizon. Birds abounded to enjoy the tall, waving, undisturbed green grasses of the banks and the fish to be had from the water. Flat wooden bridges allowed oxen or horse-drawn carts to cross the narrower drainage channels. Swing bridges did the same in wider waters, where ever-present boats navigated by sail or by oar. Whereas on the coast to the south, the traveller had witnessed the daily battering of rock by waves, here he witnessed the opposite. It was a land of rich river sediment, brought down from hills over thousands of years in a patient attempt to conquer the sea. It was morning, and ahead to the north, he saw a large town that seemed to float above water on a cushion of mist. It was the Guild town. He had read of it, had seen illustrations of the carved walkways that clung to the sides of buildings above the water. He had read about the guild that ruled the town, of its trade in worked wood and glass, and of its prosperity. The guild town surrounded a castle on an island of rock. Its walls were not far from the hills that rose in the west, but they were far enough across a wide expanse of salt marsh to impede any army and to avoid attacks by ships. It had been a long time since the town had needed to defend itself, and its martial origins were now evident only in long-standing inner and outer walls, and in the remains of the castle. The castle itself was but ruins of walls, surrounding a restored keep rooted to the highest point of rock at the town's centre. Over the years, the castle's supporting population had grown, and the stone of the greater fortifications had been sunk, creating foundations for new building. More stone had been brought from the hills to support the town's slow growth over centuries, until the coastal fortress had become a trading hub amidst waterways. Still some distance away, the raven circled and the traveller dismounted. With a shrill gargling cry, the raven flew on into the town as though time pressed. The traveller bade Melior go into the hills to await him. Leolfer would accompany him into the town. There were two land entrances to the town, One opened up to the wide fens and the track that crossed them in the south. The other to the northwest accessed a causeway to the hills. Water swept around the tall outer wall and beneath the drawbridge before gaining entrance to the town through another gate for boats. The traveller stepped across the drawbridge at the southern gate and immediately onto one of the walkways. The wood was smooth after years of wear by foot, rain, and sun. It was exquisitely carved with flowering vine to a depth that provided grip to lightly shod feet when wet. Railings too were carved, as intricately woven ropes, or as the trunks of trees with ivy reaching between. To his right, the wall of a house descended to the lapping water beneath. To his left, another row of houses and their walkway abutted the canal. The houses were of 2 stories, and prescribed by long local custom to be white, with doors and window frames the blue of summer sky. In between some were trees, gardens, and tended lawns, all rising from the soil of the sea weather that swept across those unsheltered fens. Scattered boats, their low hulls lapped by water, their oars slicing and slowly heaving, moved silently past. Others, moored, rocked in the gentle swell. All were equipped with oars and poles, many with removable masts and sails. They were simple in form, but displayed carvings similar to those of the walkways. The cries of the raven pressed him towards the town, so with Leolfer ahead, he crisscrossed his way to the center. As they got closer, the walkways were broader and the buildings were taller. Their doors, like the walkways and boats, were richly carved with patterns that reached as if they lived. In ground floor windows, exquisite diamond panes set patterns of color and displayed the long-trained skill of glassworkers. The traveller moved briskly. Not far from the inner walls that surrounded the castle park, he crossed a series of open squares of wooden planking over water. Little courtyards like these were spread throughout the town. Ornamental trees grew in large pots, and in the spring countless smaller pots and suspended beds would hold and spill over with coast flowers. Each square had its small baker's shop, marked not so much by the individually carved and painted wooden loaves that hung outside, as by the rich aromas that poured from their open doorways. Reaching a larger square, he entered the town's market, which was busy with focused, friendly activity. There the inhabitants congregated to fetch supplies, and they paid little attention to the traveller and the large dog that walked beside him. Through its busy trade, the guild town was familiar with outsiders. They came to see the showcase the guild had created, and more often than not, to commission and purchase. Passing through the market and then by a passage between houses, the traveller reached the main square at the edge of the castle rock. Whereas locals congregated in the market square, it was to this even larger square that visitors were guided. Shops filled house fronts to exhibit the wares the town produced. These were the tallest houses, their faces luxuriously decorated with painted images depicting their trade. Their windows stood floor to ceiling with panes of glass of a size and clarity of color impossible to source elsewhere. The town was a protected island, jealous of its accomplishment. For centuries, its old walls and the maze of drainage channels that surrounded it had given the inhabitants a separation from others. But the members of the guild had grown rich through trade. They were proud of their wealth in skill and in gold, and no expense had been spared in the presentation of their endeavors. Leolfer had slowed, and the traveller watched for the bird as he walked around the square to observe the town's face. The people were content but intense. A contingent of the townspeople fished the rivers and sea, another farmed the nearby hills. But fishing and farming there existed only to feed. The focus was in the export of boats, furniture, and the finest glass to be found anywhere. Their drive had brought their success, but their contentedness derived mainly from the joy of their skillful work. Leolfer looked off to the side, down a quiet walkway that led off from the square, and the traveller, following the dog's sight, saw the raven had landed atop the south gate to the castle park. The castle's inner wall, though far older than the outer wall that surrounded the town, was also still almost perfectly intact. As he neared, the coat of arms carved in stone above the gate came to his attention. 3 golden ships on a blue ground, the arms of Kieran, a man he had never met but of whom he had long known. The traveller entered and followed a path upwards through the gardens, interspersed with the ruined remains of the old castle. Fruit trees enjoyed the protection of walls, while flower beds softened the militarist past. Weathered white pedestaled figures maintained the silence surrounding the 3-story walls of the keep. The traveller reached the main drive that came in from the Causeway Road, and from there approached the door. It was sturdy, with a ram's head of iron as a knocker. Above the door, once again, the three ships. Leolfer sat in the drive, watching. The Raven was gone.